Hello, hello. Welcome back, everybody. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rico Borrego,
I am your other co-host, Tony Borrego.
and this is the podcast known as Relatively Sound, the podcast where we're taking a little holiday in Rhode Island this week. We are back with our album for album series. If you listened to the last one, then you shall know that this week we are taking a listen to Tony's suggestion of the band called the Softies. And specifically, we are listening to their album titled Holiday in Rhode Island. Now, I've never heard of this band by name, by songs, by albums, nothing. No idea they existed. So, Tony, why don't you give just like a brief background to who they are and how you know them and how you know this album and maybe even why you recommended it to me?
So, unfortunately, I don't have much background for you guys about the band. They are small. The way I found out about them is I was watching some Elliott Smith live performances, and the main singer Rose, she sang with Elliott Smith on a couple of acoustic songs, and I liked her voice, and I guess they toured with Elliott for a little bit, and I ended up, I kept meaning to check them out because I'm like, if Elliott liked them, then I probably will too. I checked out Quasi, who toured and performed with Elliott, and I liked them. Still need to look into more of their stuff. But that being said, they're a Northwest band, I believe, from Oregon, and their whole sort of deal is they're a duo. And a duo that mostly just says songs with two guitars, chords, and vocals, and harmonies, and little lead guitar melodies. That's kind of the band's principle as far as I can tell. They only have, I think, 3 records, maybe 4. And I know a couple of them. I don't know all of them very well, though, to be honest. But even though I don't have the biggest background on this band and haven't heard all their material, I really enjoy this album. And I'm excited to have Rico listen to it and give his thoughts because it's kind of similar in some ways to the Phoebe Bridgers record, that it's more kind of songwriter based, but quieter, kind of more one tone throughout. And then also too, just I feel like this is something that you don't really know. Like you wouldn't maybe expect me to like this artist, and you didn't know about the artist even to begin with. So I feel like this is a nice, fun little curveball. You not knowing what to expect, and I don't know, just talking about an album like this sounded interesting to me. So I want to know your thoughts here, and maybe that will even help me gather some thoughts on this group, on this album. So I
Yeah.
mean, just from the top, what did you expect when you first heard it? First few songs, was it what you were expecting? Were you thinking, why the hell do you like this? What was your experience?
Well, I mean, I really had no preconceived thoughts going into the album because I'd never heard of them. I think the only thing he mentioned to me was that it was an all girls band, and maybe you even said it was just a duo. So my only thought was like, and then I think you maybe mentioned them touring, opening for Elliott Smith, and then because of the quasi relationship with Elliott Smith and Sleater Kenny, I was like, maybe they're like Sleater Kenny, which you and I both, enjoy some songs and albums from Sleater Kenny. So I was like, maybe that's what it's like. So, 2 songs in the album, maybe 3 songs in the album, I was like, okay, this is not like Sleater Kenny. This is like kind of not what we consider today, but probably back then, because this album came out in the year 2000, almost like bedroom pop.
It says 95 over here.
No, that's what we were kind of discussing earlier on the phone. Spotify says 95, but Wikipedia says 2000.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm pretty sure 2000 makes more sense because there's a lyric in one of the songs where she sings drawing a line through 1999, which wouldn't have made sense if this album came out in 95. So I'm pretty sure it's 2000. But we could be wrong because, like Tony mentioned, this band does not have a ton of information online about them. They only have 3 albums. They only were active from, I believe, 94 to the year 2000. And this was their last album they released. They toured one more time after the year 2000. That was it. It seems like the 2 people in the band had other projects, and this was like a side project for them. but yeah, like 3 songs into it, I'm like, this is kind of like not lo-fi, but like this is just chill bedroom kind of pop singer songwriter like. But I was a little like confused, only in the sense that I would never think this is an album you would like. It's weird because this is an album that, like, if we were being stereotypical about each other, this seems like something more that I would like and something that you wouldn't, because it is very, I mean, literally almost every song, with the exception of a couple, it is just 2 guitars, usually electric, one doing chords, one doing a melody that a lot of the time is either simple melody or almost seems like kind of just noodling around. And then there's a vocal, and there's usually a harmony with the other singer, the other guitarist. And that's about it. There's only like one song that has drums. There's one that has a piano, and a couple that I believe it's a xylophone, some type of xylophone like sound. And that's like it. There's like, I think 1 or 2 that has bass as well. Um, but other than that, it's literally just like 2 guitars, 2 vocalists, and the songs are just like kind of lovey-dovey songs. Like they're very like basic concepts of what the songs are about. They're like either about loving someone else, or maybe like a falling out with someone else, like a breakup. Um, there's a lot of mentions of like seasons and colors I noticed throughout the songs. But they're like very simple. Most of the songs are short. There's 14 songs on this album, which is the most songs in any of the albums we've done so far. But yet the album only clocks in at about 37 minutes, which to me is a little shorter than an average album length. And 2 of the songs are basically instrumentals as well. So it was a very like perplexing listen on the first listen, because it was not what I was expecting. Not that I was really expecting anything, but I was just not expecting you to recommend me an album like this. I thought, if anything, I would recommend you an album like this, like Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, which is just him and acoustic guitar. So I was pretty surprised when I first heard this album.
Well,
And
to be fair, I would say that I do like Elliott Smith. I do like some acoustic, albums and some stripped down songs. I do see what you're saying about all the other, comparisons. I do want to real quickly before I forget mention that you had said that there's a lot of talks kind of about the seasons and whatnot, and that's interesting because one of the few kind of actual details about the album is that there are 3 releases, all kind of are supposed to represent a season. I'm not sure if this is like a confirmed thing or sort of just a speculation, but it would kind of make sense. They have an album called Winter Pageant. I think you can guess what season that's supposed to be. Holiday in Rhode Island is supposed to be like the spring season. And then their release, It's Love, is like the summer release. Just thought that was kind of an interesting note.
yeah, so I would be curious if those other albums had different sounds, because like most of these songs were like in major keys. I will say they use chords that were different than, like, it wasn't always just like open G, C, D. Like, I will say, and maybe like the 3rd chord in the song "Me and the Bees," I love that chord. I would not be able to tell you what it was unless I grabbed the guitar and like listen by ear. But that was like a chord progression in that song specifically that I found really interesting and very pleasant. Like, I really enjoyed that chord progression. So I'm not saying all the songs are simple.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the reasons I thought you might like this album, is because kind of the because it's pretty clear that they write songs with chords and vocals, and then they add the guitar melody and harmonies. A lot of their songs are just strumming chords on an acoustic or electric, and a lot of capo usage. And so they kind of bring in those kind of some of those unique chords, which sound kind of more just like kind of shapes. And that's not a slam at all. It's a style, and I think that I didn't know if you would appreciate that.
Well, I kind of did, and then I kind of didn't. But again, I was just still so shocked because, like, yeah, you like Elliott Smith, which does mostly acoustic, but his songs are like darker. They're sometimes a little bit more intense. I do find, I haven't heard all his albums, but the albums I've heard of his usually have more instrumentation than this album. And even like some of the other singer songwriters you listen to, like Mark Lanigan or Scott Wheeldon from STP, I just felt like this was just way more simple and just more like, I don't know. Like I'm still just a little surprised you like this album so much. I don't know if it's just because you discovered them from Elliott Smith. And I'm not saying this album is bad at all. And maybe it's just because the vast difference between this month's album and last month's album you gave me, which was Manic Street Preacher's Holy Bible. Like you couldn't almost get two more completely different albums. Um, so maybe that was just a little jarring for me. I don't know, but this album, it's this is gonna sound really like a mean criticism, but it's like a perfect background album.
A perfect back. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Like it was great for when I was reading, but I don't know if I could listen to this album without doing something else. Like I can sit down and just listen to a Springsteen album, a Pearl Jam album, a Tom Petty album, and enjoy it. But because this album is so like bare bone, but also because a lot of the songs sounded the same, it's like great if you just need background music. Like if you're like, maybe talking with friends or reading like I do. I love to listen to music and read at the same time. It's just like, and it's short, which is good for the most part. And the songs are short, but I had a hard time. Like I really had to sit down and take notes for this album because like I felt like the songs blended into one another a little too much. And there are some exceptions. Like I do think my favorite on the album by far is Mean the Bees. That progression is just lovely. It's the one song that has drums, and even though the drums aren't doing anything crazy, it gives the song kind of a flow. It makes you kind of tap your foot and bounce your head along with it. The piano I thought was great. I actually wish there was more piano throughout the whole album because I did get a little tired of just like the guitar melodies on electric guitar. So I really enjoyed the piano on that song. And then the melodies during like the chorus had nice little runs in it that I thought were different than some of the melodies throughout the rest of the album. And it had really cool lyrics. It like the lyric "A cyclone of falling leaves" was cool. It reminded me of something that would be on Brendan Benson's debut album, One Mississippi. It kind of gave me like a Cherries vibe, if you know that song. I know you know it, but our listeners, if they know that song by Brendan Benson, it kind of gives me that vibe, but just a more chilled version of that song.
Honestly, I was kind of wondering if you would like the song, but for a different reason. To me, this song sounds kind of more like a Brad song, kind of like Never Let Each Other Down, as far as the production, with the very lush chords. I don't know, that's kind of more what I compare it to. It's interesting that you say Benson, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can see the Brad influence in that sense or the comparison because it's like the drums kind of like, yeah, it is like a Brad song in that sense. And people don't know Brad is a band from Seattle in the late 90s. Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam, guitarist, was in the band. And their music is very chill, but their music definitely had more variety. They had like rock songs. But yeah, they had
Yeah,
a lot of
they're a
songs.
rock band.
They had a lot of songs where it was like piano and then just strumming electric guitar, like this song. So I can see that influence as well. But I love Brad and Brandon Benson as well. So like either way, I was gonna like the song no matter who you think it sounds more like. So yeah, in that sense, I still really enjoyed the song. So like that was a favorite of mine for sure. Um, I also, I guess the songs on the album that stood out to me were the ones that had standout moments or parts, like in Just the Day. That one was where it was two acoustics. And I actually kind of prefer that than the electrics because don't get me wrong, I'm totally fine with a slow electric guitar song. In fact, sometimes I prefer that over just like a rock song with electric guitar. Like that is overdone. Hearing like a song where it's just like kind of slow chords with electric guitar, I think is cool. But this album, I think, takes that to the limit of like how much I can listen to that in a row. which is why I like the song Just a Day, because the acoustic guitar just like was a fresh breath air of, oh, I said that backwards, a breath of fresh air, and it was just really pretty in the song. Um, and that's the song that has the line, drawing a line through 1999, which I thought was just kind of cool. Um, and they mentioned spring in the song too, which I, again, if if you mentioned this album might be the spring album of their albums, and I could totally see that. So like those were like stand up moments, but then there was a lot of songs that like I have notes for, but I don't have a ton of notes because like I don't know, like I think the first two songs were great. Sleep Your Troubles Away and Places We Go. That were both cool. Sleep Your Trouble Away kind of like set the pace for the album. Like, this is a chill vibe. This is who we are.
And that's their most listened to song on Spotify, throwing that out there.
Yeah, and it's a gentle song. And then Places We Go, I liked it even more because I've just like the harmonies a little better. I think the chorus was a little catchier. I like the chord changes better. They had like lines about the northern air, which I thought was kind of cool. They had cool little transitional chords between like the verse and chorus. So it was like the first song, but I think even better. But then like These Sad Times and the next song, Beginning of the End, besides the xylophone kind of sound in These Sad Times, I just was like, I felt like the like mood of the album, the whole two electric guitar thing was just already starting to run its course a little for me.
See, I think These Sad Times is a great song. I think it's very moody. And I do agree that it is kind of moody in the same way that Sleep Away Your Troubles is. But I don't think it's necessarily the same mood as the majority of the rest of the album. And like you said, the xylophone thing or whatever does really give a new depth to the song. I do agree with you on that, that a lot of the additional instrumentation on select tracks do bring those tracks up a little bit.
Well, I will say I do, yeah, These At Times definitely has, it's not like the most major key song, like it is sadder sounding. The lyrics themselves too are a little darker. She sings about bewitching in the song, and there's a line where she sings, "You don't need me like you say you do," which is just kind of like a sad line. Um, so it does stand out more, but I'm just saying like the overall aesthetic of the two guitars and just the format of the song, I thought by that point was already getting not stale because that sounds mean, but it's kind of I think how you felt a little bit with like the Radiohead album, where I was like, I feel like I should be liking these songs more, but something wasn't clicking with me as much as I thought it would. It's like the complete opposite criticism I had of Holy Bible, where there was too much going on. With this album, I feel like there wasn't enough going on for me to truly enjoy it as much as I would any album, like Darkness on the Edge of Town, which we talked about last week. That said, there was nothing on this album. There was no one song that I like really disliked. I will say the two instrumental songs, Sturdy's Bay, which technically has some background law backing vocals, and
Saint Agnes, which
yeah,
immediately follows, which I think is a very strange to have the two outlier songs, both short, both basically instrumental, just be right next to each other.
yeah, like those moments, like that, like really, that was the only thing I had in my notes. I mean, the only thing I had in my notes for those songs were Sturdy's Bay is a real place in British Columbia, and then Saint, how did you say it?
Saint Agnes? I'm just
Agnes.
guessing.
That I looked that up, and I guess it was like a historical martyr, like in history. So like
Oh,
those were interesting in just the song titles because some of these song titles are just very kind of generic. If I'm being honest, If You Stayed, My Empty Arms, Places We Go, Beginning. And I'm not someone to judge a song by just its name, but like the song lyrically, it for the most part, it is like what the song is about. Like These Sad Times is her singing about these sad times. It's not, We're like, okay, we're taking an example from last week's episode, Candy's Room. I bet you when you went into that song, you had no idea what the song was going to be about, right? Besides that,
Yeah.
Candy is like probably a person, right? But it's like, what is the song going to be about? Like,
I mean, what did you
um,
think Me and the Bees was going to be about? What type of title is that?
well, I see when I got to Me and the Bees, I wasn't so shocked by that song title because, like, if there was going to be a song called Me and the Bees on any album, I feel like it would be this album.
Right. But see, for me, I thought that would have been a happier sounding song. But instead, it's actually the
True,
most sluggish one on the album. Sluggish in a good way, though. But
true. I agree with you there. The song title is a little misleading, but
so, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that like this album, where I want to start asking you questions is this an album that you can actively listen to, or is this an album you put on when you're wanting to chill and vibe, maybe like after a long day's work, or if you're just not in the mood for something that's more upbeat, like is because this album is pleasant to listen. Like I said, there's no really my least favorite song, but for some reason was If You Stayed. I like actually just did not like the lyric or the sound of If You Stayed.
Oh, yeah. We
Like,
can talk about that a little more.
yeah, like I just that was the most like annoying song. Like I'm like, okay, the melodies in this are like it's too poppy, it's too almost like childlike. Like I that was the one song where like I rolled my eyes a little bit, but the rest, like even songs like Write It Down, My Empty Arms, like there's nothing. The songs were not one way or another enough for me to either get excited or get too angry about them because I dislike them, Where like the Manic Street Preacher album, there were songs on there where like I like was like, what is this song? But there was nothing like that for this album. Like it was just like chill, but I don't know. I'm just kind of curious where your enjoyment of the album comes from, if it's slightly different than mine.
See, I'm kind of shocked because I feel like all the things that you might be diving into, of things that you might like, you're not diving into. So let me explain that. So like a big part of that would be like the lyrics, but so let me start off why I enjoy it. That's a good little starting point. I really enjoy this record because I love the vocals. I love her voice, and I think the harmonies are fantastic. They sound great together. The minimalist production, granted, the configuration, like we've been talking about, two guitars, two voices, some extra overdubs, but pretty contained. I think that, the production's really soft and pleasing, which makes it work really well for, like a little background album. It's, a good canvas for the soft vocal delivery, which is kind of kind of silky sounding. I don't know how to quite explain that. Um, but I just like the songwriting a lot. I think the songs are well written with the progressions. I think the melodies are all pretty good. There is some songs definitely where, they're maybe not as special as some of the other ones. Um, and I think the lyrics are really good too. I like the lyrics on the majority of the songs. And I think I can pull out some lyrics that I really like from each one. Um, that being said, I think the only huge downfall I see that I don't have a problem, coming out right and saying it is there's two songs that Jen sings lead on. And I like the first one, Beginning of the End, but If You Stayed, I do agree. I think the vocals are a little too rough for it. Lyrics aren't as good. Um, I do like hearing Rose do backup vocals. That is kind of cool to hear them swap places. But and then additionally too, the two instrumentals that precede it, I feel like if you were to chop off Sturdy's Bay, St. Agnes, and If You Stayed, which are all in a row, you would have an 11-song album that's super solid. But I think a big part of the enjoyment is I think it's just really nice to listen to. It sounds good. It has sort of a comforting quality. I think it's kind of a refreshing album. You hear a lot of maybe rock music for a change or something, and then you hear this, and it's kind of like a palate cleanser, so to speak. Um, But I don't know. I'm just surprised that I'm not sure. Like, do you like their vocals? Is that something that you're not into?
No, I do like the vocals. Yeah, I failed to mention that up to this point. Um, yeah, they both have nice voices. Um, I think they're fitting for one another. Like the harmonies are. I thought almost all the harmonies were great. Maybe it's like a lack of knowledge with this band and the fact that there's not a lot of info. I like to like really get into the lore of a band or artist,
It
and
does. Yeah,
because
lore can make a difference.
there was like none of that for this band, like, and maybe I just wasn't paying close enough attention. I didn't even know those two songs you mentioned that they had swapped. But I will
Yeah.
say, I enjoy their voices. And the songs themselves, they're very chill. They're smooth. The production is smooth, but like I don't know, like this does seem like an album I should like more. But like, okay, for example, like you said that you even have lyrics you're gonna pull out and like talk about, which is cool. But it blows my mind that you don't do that for other albums.
Well,
Like,
because
is it because I mean I write lyrics and I don't know if I'd say my lyrics are any good, but like these lyrics are just like really they're simple, not bad. They're simple. And I don't know, but like compared to Elliott Smith, someone you really, really like I think his lyrics are way more like sophisticated and you can like pull them apart and there's a little bit more depth and stuff. And like our Springsteen, someone we just talked about last week, like when we did that episode, you didn't mention lyrics too much.
I don't
And
think the lyrics were that stand out to me. Now, granted, I think there were sections that did stand out, which actually you mentioned some of those moments for me, like the ending of Something in the Night. Like it's more of the scene. It's more of the scenes that Springsteen paints that I liked. It's not necessarily I like each lyric, but his delivery is what really sells those lyrics.
I don't
Um,
know, maybe it's like a same side of the same coin, whatever that phrase is. Cause like I feel like this album, the lyrics are either like love or like them describing like the seasons or like colors and stuff.
well,
And
okay.
I think after a while it just gets a little tiring for me. But I guess you could say the same for Springsteen. You're like, why does every song he sings about has to be like a character and
Why is it
have
all
these
about
same?
cars and
Yeah, so
daddy
I
girls?
guess it's not a super valid argument from my side, but like I don't know, like if this song was like an EP, I think I would enjoy it more. And I'm very curious because I might do it for next month's episode, and I'm not going to tell you the artist yet, but you've heard of him before. Um, and he has an album, his style of music is kind of similar like this, but I just think he does it more interestingly. And I will be shocked if you listen to that album and don't like it as much as this one. But you might not because I don't like this one as much as that album, the album that I'm not naming yet. But it's just because I think this album is like, it's a mood, but it's like too much of the same mood. And I don't know, like it's hard.
It
It's
is a
really hard
little
to
one
describe.
toned.
Yeah, that's my problem. Is just it's too one tone. Like at least if I'm gonna listen to an album by a full band, if like I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like maybe the Worst Killers album or the Worst Petty album or Billy Joel album.
This is a
Maybe
great comparison.
like the worst ones of their albums are like every song is just kind of the same tempo, nothing super exciting. But because it's a full band, there's more to listen to. Like there's bass, there's drums, there's guitar, there's piano. Here it's just like pretty much the same two instruments the whole time.
Well, I
You
mean,
know what I'm saying?
but you could maybe, you were just talking to me today about, I do not remember what song it was. We were talking about Bruce, and you were saying that there's I think a song off Promised Land or one of those records where you didn't like it, but then you heard the version stripped down and it turned to like your second favorite Bruce song or something. This is a whole album of stripped down songs. So I think
Yeah,
it
but
does offer a different listening experience. Granted, it is physically, it is physically simpler, but it's a new experience.
I will say this. I wouldn't want to, because the song you're talking about is Bruce Springsteen's song called "The Promise," which was written during Darkness on the Edge of Town. Never wasn't released for the longest time. Played it live. He did release a studio version with the E Street Band, but then in 1999, on a compilation album, he released just a piano version with him and a piano. And I find it stunning because it's the lyrics. It's one of those songs where like the lyrics are the most important part. He's telling a story. He's like some of it is fictional, some of it is probably autobiographical, and like there's kind of a sadness to it where like as the song goes on, it just feels like it gets kind of sadder and sadder. And like the version that has the full band strips away all that sadness somehow, and it just makes it a generic song. But at that same point, I don't know if I'd want a whole album of him just in a piano. I would find it interesting, I guess, because I love Springsteen and I would listen to it. But it's okay. It's almost like what U2's recently done. They did their latest album is basically them redoing 40 of their songs that already existed, kind of in a stripped back version. And I bought it and I enjoyed it. A lot of people did not enjoy it. Hardcore U2 fans hated it, but I enjoyed it for what it was, which was like kind of, stripped back versions of their songs. But I found it interesting because I already loved those original songs to begin with. Here, as I'm listening to 14 new songs I've never heard before, and they all have the same sound. You see, there's kind of a slight difference. I'm not saying your point is invalid. I'm just that to me that's the slight difference between the two.
So I see the slight difference. But what is the difference between this and Punisher, the Phoebe Bridgers record?
Because I think there's a lot more going on with that album.
I mean, is ambient noises in the back a lot more going on?
Yeah, which I think is more interesting. And even though Kyoto is the only rock song, ICU has drums and it's kind of peppy. And
I mean,
you do have some drums on other songs. Like there are drums on Satellite, and the ending of I Know the End kind of goes pretty hard. That album is stripped back more like this album. By far, those two albums out of all the albums we've done so far are the most similar sounding. I just found that album, it had more going on to the lyrics. Like she was singing a song about wanting to believe in an afterlife, and then she was singing a song about not being able to love another person because they're in a relationship. Then she was singing a song about her relationship with her dad. Like there was just more things there to kind of nibble on as you're listening to the album.
Yeah, but I don't know if you would necessarily say. Now, I'm not saying this in regards to whether I think the lyrics on this record are better than the Phoebe Bridgers, but it's a different lyrical style in the same way that you wouldn't say that just because it talks about more themes than the themes on Darkness on the Edge of Town, you wouldn't necessarily say the lyrics are better. And maybe let me kind of rephrase what I'm now that we're kind of discussing it. I think part of why I do like the lyrics on the Softies record is because I like the delivery of them, like the Bruce record. I think Rose delivered the lyrics in a way that was vulnerable, yet kind of straightforward, but it came off really pretty sounding. And I don't know, I think it was a really, a very vulnerable, emotional sort of record.
Yes, and I do agree. The delivery is great. It's just halfway through the album, I was just I wanted to see what else they could deliver.
That is fair.
And I don't know what their other two albums sound like, but if they sound very similar to this, I would still give them a listen, but it would not change my mind. Now, if their other two albums, if they have an album where there's a drums on almost every song, or if they have an album where there's just more piano or different styles of songs, then maybe I'll say, well, then this album is kind of a concept album. But if this is just their overall sound, I could totally see why people would be into this. But I was trying to describe it to Lindsay the other day because I was just, wanting to kind of, when I was jotting down my notes for this album, to kind of just talk about it. And I didn't want to talk to you about it because we're saving that for the episode today. But
did she hear some of it too? Or
no, she didn't get it. I didn't play her any.
Right. Yeah. Don't be plotting together.
No. But
just playing.
I don't know if you've ever seen the movie. There's a movie with Steve Carell called Dan in Real Life.
I've heard of it. I've never seen it though.
Yeah, it was like one of the movies I think he released after he was like well known for his role in The Office. And it's a very kind of feel good movie. It's a very like a movie about this guy raising his daughters on his own, and like the movie centers around him at like a family get together at like a cabin kind of. And the soundtrack of the movie is just very like it's pleasant and it fits the vibe of the film, which is kind of a cozy vibe. Like it's a feel good it's like for the most part it's a family film. It's definitely not like The Office where there's like sometimes like vulgar jokes. Like it's just a very like it's a movie you can put on when it's raining or like in the springtime. Like, and it's a movie Lindsay and I really like. And I like the music in that film, but I don't know if I would ever like buy it on vinyl or CD and listen to it outside of the film, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. That does make sense.
Because the songs are similar in the sense that sometimes it's just because I think the same guy did like all the songs, and there's songs where he's singing lyrics, and there's songs where he's like playing a guitar and piano, but it's kind of the same tone throughout the whole thing. And I do like an album that is coherent in a tone or a message, but this one just didn't interest me all the time. Like,
it's valid.
I'm curious, like, what to you is super different from a song like Favorite Shade of Blue and like the title track? Those two songs are back to back on the album. And my notes are just like Holiday in Rhode Island, the title track, the xylophone is back. Chords are nice. I felt like the song wasn't really happy or sad. It was kind of in the middle. It was about a vacation far away from the West Coast, as the title would suggest. And I just wrote, okay, like it was that's my notes. And then Favorite Shade of Blue, kind of similar notes. The only thing that was slightly different was where like the lyrics were like the lyrics in that one were more interesting than I would say Holiday in Rhode Island. But like there's not a lot I can like I can never say that word, but there's not a lot I can
differentiate.
Yeah, between the two songs.
Now I will say those aren't my top two favorites, definitely. But I will say, yeah, so lyrically they are different subjects. I think they're kind of self-explanatory. But I think musically, like the harmonic palette is different. Favorite Shade of Blues has like it has a lot of those dominant 7 chords, which don't make it bluesy, but they have that kind of more like 60s sound to it, which I really dig. Where Holiday in Rhode Island is a little more kind of, like you said, it's not like necessarily like a depressing song or anything, but it definitely has a different emotion to it. In the letter, you didn't say that the weather would be so dreadful, like her coming up to Rhode Island, and like, I don't know, it's a different pace. It's a short song though. It's not even quite 2 minutes. And Favorite Shade of Blue is more of like a full length song. So I kind of see Holiday in Rhode Island not being a filler track, but it's definitely one that I think works better on the album than standalone. Now, what would be really interesting would be if this band had a bigger, more public audience, and we could kind of hear other people's thoughts on it. Because I would also love to know which tracks people really gelled with and which didn't, and their thoughts as well, which it kind of makes it hard because you really have to form your own preference here. For me, like I know a standout song was the one after Favorite Shade of Blue, You and Only You. I thought that one had really nice lyrics, and I thought it had a good structure and was one of the most standalone songs from the album. Is that one that you kind of cling to or no?
It is maybe more on like the top end of tracks for me. Like it's maybe in the top. It could maybe be top 5, like number 5. I like that it was like a mix of the. If I wrote in my notes, so hopefully what I'm saying is correct. It had acoustic and electric guitars. Is that true?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I like that it wasn't just 2 electrics. Like I would say the majority of the songs, there was like some kind of backing vocals that I thought were nice. During the pre-chorus, the melody during the chorus I thought was nice. But then the end of my notes for that song, as I wrote more lyrics about love. That's kind of it. And then the last thing I wrote was I liked the wavy hair lyric because it's relatable having like wavy hair in the morning.
Right.
But like that was it. Like that, like and I'm not saying not every song on every album needs to be broken apart like we did with Candy's Room in the last episode with the Bruce album. For sure, not every song has to be like that. And I can appreciate a song for what it is, but like I don't know, maybe this is exactly how you felt with the Phoebe Bridgers album. Um, because like again, I don't dislike this album at all, but I do think it's like the least exciting one you've given me. Like even though I probably like I would say I like this one more than Holy Bible, but I almost appreciate Holy Bible more if you understand what I'm saying. Like because I felt like it took more risk. Same with even the Tom Waits. I know that's not one I've talked about much because it was like the first one we did. And I think some of the albums you gave me afterwards I enjoyed more, like the Incubus or the Stone Temple Pilots. But like even like the Tom Waits one had more like variety, even if it's not an album I've listened to a lot since that episode that we recorded. I will say it sounds like this album you can get more enjoyment from it if you know music theory, because you were pointing out like the song has like dominant 7 chords and the song has that. Because my music theory is not on par with yours, I did feel like I was someone listening to an album that doesn't play music, because I do feel like this album to me, if I was to listen to it not knowing how to play an instrument, I could see someone calling it basic,
Well,
but
see,
not in an insulting way.
I think this album would be very friendly to non-musicians because it's a more simple format.
No,
At
yeah,
the end
that's
of the
what I'm
day,
saying.
it's like, do you like the progression? Like, not even like the theory part. Do you like the progression? Do you like the vocals? Then those answers determine whether you like the song or not. I feel like, but maybe you mentioning that maybe that is something. Maybe I can pick out the differences between the songs a little easier because I kind of have more things to differentiate them with, such as the progression, what they're implying, the approach to the song, which may not be so apparent to everyone.
Like
Um,
I do think this album has a time and place. Um, I just feel like I'd have to be in the mood for it. And I don't know, like it's interesting. It's interesting even if I find it a little boring, because just knowing your taste in music, I am still a little surprised you like it as much as you do. I'm not shocked that you thought I would like it more, because I am the one out of the two of us that would be into this music more than you. But maybe over the years my
but
music,
not so much anymore, I
well, yeah,
guess.
I think maybe my taste in music has changed a little bit, where again, I there was a handful of songs I did not like at all on the Manic Street Preacher album Holy Bible, but my notes for each song was like a paragraph long, because like there was a lot to say. For this album, obviously I took notes, and I kind of had to take notes because even right now I can't think of how most of the songs go in my head.
Yeah, I will say I think that is the biggest flaw of this album is that they could have easily chopped down. But I had songs in mind, but if they took off kind of like 3 or 4 songs near the end, it would have been a lot tighter.
But
Um,
then my problem is, like, you did mention taking off those 3 in a row, the 2 instrumental and then the song If You Stayed. But Saint Agnes, that
mhm.
one to me has the most out there chord progression.
I mean that is true. I
The
mean, okay,
music, the guitar melodies, and I think that the melodies maybe playing against the chords almost sounded a little dissonant, like a little off, a little like almost jazzy or something. Like, and did I enjoy it? Not really, but I felt like that was the most like whoa kind of moment on the album, even if it was like not even a minute, or not even a 2 minute long song. Again, I don't know if I would keep it on because of that reason alone, but that was one of the times on the album where I felt like it did start to sound a little different.
yeah. I mean, I feel like I know I just said just cut those ones off. I mean, if you sprinkled in Sturdy's Bay and St. Agnes throughout, I think it would have been fine. I mean, really, with an album so short that like you might as well keep as many songs as you can. The only one that I would say that I really don't care for is If You Stayed, which we talked about, but it's only 2 minutes long. It's just, I think the track listing order is kind of what's weird about it.
I would say this too, like, um, I'm curious, like, obviously it was just the two of them, and you and I talked about not knowing if it was a different person who recorded the drums on Me and the Bees or like the xylophone piano parts. It could have been them. I have no idea. Again, there's not a lot of info on this band or album online, or if there is, I'm just missing it. But like, obviously, it sounded like they wanted to go with the style of music. I'm curious, like, do you think they ever thought about adding more parts? Because like, I do think some of these songs, like for example, I'm not wrong to say that in the beginning of the end, there's a bass in it, right?
Yeah, it's kind of weird sounding though, right? Like it kind of
Maybe
sounds like
like
a
it's a
bass.
like a guitar playing just, maybe it's tuned down, or like maybe it's played through a bass amp. I don't know, but like, yeah, it's there's
I
definitely some
think it
type
is
of
a
bassing.
bass, but it just doesn't have a lot of low end to it. It's interesting, the production on it.
Yeah. And I think there's one other song too where maybe there's like that same kind of sound. I can't find it in my notes now, but for sure beginning and the end has that sound.
Right. I almost
Um,
wonder if it. Do you think it's If You Stayed? Because that's the other song where Jen sings. But I'm not sure if it was that one.
if it was, I didn't put it in my notes, but there definitely was another song that I think had a similar kind of. Oh no, I put My Empty Arms. It sounded like it had a lead bass part as well.
Does it? Does it?
Yeah,
And actually, I like that one a lot.
I put more xylophone and maybe a lead bass guitar in my notes.
I'll
Followed
have to give
by
that one another listen. I know it does have the xylophone thing going on though.
followed by weird apricot lyric. But
I really
yeah,
like My Empty
but
Arms. It's a very sad song though, but
like listening to like the bass, at least on beginning of the end, the song, it made me think like maybe I would have enjoyed this album a little bit more if they added in more instruments throughout the songs. Not every song, because I do think like the first two songs, "Sleep Your Troubles Away" and "Places We Go," I think work really well as is. But again, my favorite by far being Me and the Bees had like a guitar, drums, and piano, and I enjoy that one the most. I also just had a progression I really liked with the guitar and the piano, but I was just like curious if you thought like these songs could have even been better with more instrumentation.
I think you have a good point with talking about how beginning of the end kind of it does showcase it's kind of like a snippet, like it's kind of an alternate reality where the band did decide to do instrumentation. That little intro bit. That being said, yeah, I do think it would be really cool to hear this album with more instrumentation because I agree that with the overdubs, it does bring these songs to kind of a new point. Um, but also kind of thinking, well, why did they choose not to? You could maybe narrow it down with a more maybe objective answer, just like, oh, well, it's just the two of them, so they just kind of kept it simple to what they wanted to do, or maybe it was just easier or whatnot. But I think part of it may be artistically they decided to maybe do something a little more intimate, a little more personal. I think this record does have a lot of personality, and it's. I know I talk a lot about records that you can bond with and connect with, kind of using those words interchangeably. And I think to me that is an element that I kind of do like. It's sparse, yet the songs don't necessarily feel like they're missing things. I get the itching to want to hear more parts, but I don't know. There's something really personal about these songs that I just really like, and I don't find that in every record.
Yeah, I definitely can appreciate it for what it is. And maybe I'm the one that's not digging deep enough into the lyrics. But and the lyrics, I do think the lyrics fit the music.
Yeah,
I
I
just
think that's definitely a factor
I
on
could
why I
just
like
see
the
this,
lyrics.
like I could see someone making like a little short indie film, maybe about a relationship filmed in like the Northwest. Um and this being like the soundtrack to it. which again is not like a diss towards this album or overall sound. That's just like the vibes I get.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I think that would actually be really fitting.
But I guess to
Um,
ask a question, I think I asked earlier, but maybe you didn't answer, or maybe I got off track. Do you actually sit down and just listen to this album, or is this more of a background album for you? Because you are someone
oh,
that
that's
does
right.
you do like to do background albums because like even fully completely, maybe one of your favorite albums that you've listened to on this podcast. It sounds like that's an album you put on when like you're working and you need something to kind of pump you up a little bit and kind of get the day going. But it's
And
still not like an album you sit down and break apart, like I know you probably do with STP albums, Elliott Smith, Soundgarden. So do you do that with this album, or is this one that you do break apart?
so, real quick, when you say like fully completely, what makes that a perfect background album for me, and it's one of those records where it's great in the background because of the energy, the vibes, whatever. It's easy to listen to. But when I do have those opportunities where I do focus in on the music, I listen to it closer, it, it, there is more to it. So I can kind of switch between background to listening closely. And I think that also applies to this album, strangely enough. For me, I find that there's the whole aspect of it just being sonically pleasing, being like you said, almost like a soundtrack. The production is smooth. I really love the vocals. Like you said, for reading, that'd be like perfect. But I think once you add in kind of the lyrics, the small details, and maybe the overdubs, not saying that they're complex, I think when you bring in those aspects, you kind of get a almost like a kind of like a diary entry, or something like that. And I think that by actively listening to it, you do kind of you do feel really close with the artist, which is why I like to kind of actively listen to it. Whether I'm like maybe I'm just driving home at night or something, something dirt simple where I can actually listen to the lyrics and everything. So I think maybe part of why I do really enjoy the album is kind of a reason you mentioned earlier, just in a different way. You talked about me being a musician and knowing some music theory, but I just think as a musician like you and an artist, maybe I really respect this album, and maybe I wish in my own way that I could write songs maybe a little more personal in that way. Um, that's just speculation.
That's interesting. The very last thing you mentioned, because knowing your songs, at least knowing your album, Good Cause, um, I find those songs to be more personal than the songs in this album. I think maybe your songs, like I feel like a lot of songs that we both like and listen to, sometimes hide feelings through and emotions through like metaphors and things like that. But your lyrics to me are never that obtuse or that, you know, drenched in metaphors where I can't figure out what the song's about. These lyrics on this album, I feel like they're so to the point. There's for most of the lyrics, there's almost nothing else that it could be about. And that's
But
why I don't find them as interesting, because I feel like on one listen, I already have the song figured out.
but that's kind of the refreshing part, isn't it? Think about it. To say exactly what you mean and to not hide it in a metaphor, to not even really have necessarily a double meaning, and to not hide it in fancy production with layers of instrumentation. That's scary. That's scary to write a song and put your heart and soul and just be vulnerable and forward with it. And that's something that I respect. I think that takes a lot of courage. And now, as I say that, it's not like I listen to the album and I'm like, wow, these guys are so brave. This is, the most innovative thing I've heard. It's not like that. But I think maybe those aspects do touch me in a way that's maybe more, not so in depth, thought out like that. But I think maybe I can feel those impacts. Um, but yeah, I don't know. This
Well,
album does touch me in a way.
and I do appreciate the album, and I do think it'll be cool if someone asks, who's like, "Oh, do you have an album recommendation? I need something that's like chill and maybe more quiet or more acoustic or more laid back." now I feel like I have an album that's like that. Although the album that I'm thinking about giving you for next month is also, I think, like that, but better. Which we'll get to that when and if I recommend you this album that I will not name yet. But um, yeah, it's just I don't know. It has moments that I like, and I do agree with your point that it is nice to have a song like that, and it can be refreshing. I just don't know if I need 14 songs like that. Even if the songs are like less than 3 minutes altogether, I don't think I want a whole album. Even though it's only 37 minutes long, this album honestly felt longer to me. Maybe
I could
especially,
see that. There is a lot of songs. I will say that kind of defining the songs, remembering them separately is a little difficult. I totally agree with that.
but yeah, I mean, I think I do. I am glad you recommended me this album because again, it was like a 180 from last month's album, but it is very different. And I don't think he'll give me another album that'll sound like this unless you give me another one of their albums. But like, even if you give me an Ellie Smith album, another one, different one, I don't know. So I think this album's very unique. Um, and like I said, there are a couple songs I'll be going back to. The first couple songs, especially "Me and the Bees" for sure. Um, and that's the one I would recommend to other people. But if anything, I just found this album insightful when it comes to what you like to listen to, if that makes sense. Kind of like when I listen to radio, or when you listen to the Radiohead album, or maybe the U2 or the Spoon, you were kind of surprised that I like that type of music because in the past I maybe wouldn't have. And this is the same way, but the opposite for you. It's like in the past I would not have expected you to like an album like this.
Okay, okay, okay. I'll respect that answer.
Yeah. So um yeah, I'm not disappointed in the album. Hopefully I didn't disappoint with my reaction to it. Like I said, I think you probably thought I would like it more. And the thing is I did want to like it more. But I also just had to be honest about it. But the nice thing about the album was there was nothing that I like disliked, maybe besides If You Stayed, that one song. But everything else, like, I did like. I just my likeness level could only go so far up for any of the songs on this album.
Yeah, just like any album I give you, I hope you enjoy it. So I was hoping you would enjoy the album a little more, but at the same time, I am at least glad that I was able to show you an album that you haven't heard before, and at the very least, at least a good reading album for you. It sounds like.
Yeah, and again, that's not an insult because I love to listen to music when I read,
Yeah, totally.
and I can listen to really any album when I read. Like it can be a heavy rock album, whatever. Um, Now I will say I usually don't like to listen. I only gave this album a listen when I was reading, like on after my third listen, because I typically don't like to listen to music I've never heard before and read because then I'm not going to pay that much attention to the music because I'm reading a book. But like once I have this album figured out, again, it was great to like read to because it's just like, you know, it just I still can like kind of nod my head to it and I still enjoy it. It was very pleasant and it just also was nice to read to. So yeah, I thank you for the recommendation. I think that's pretty much it for this episode. I think definitely one of the most like interesting episodes and albums that we've
This is
done
the
and
most
maybe will
torn
be.
we've been. I mean, even though I would say that, well, I love the Manic Street Preachers record, and you don't love it. Um, I think as far as our opinions, I think we're most split on this album so far.
Yeah, I would agree because and I think we both agree with each other's points. We just see this album differently. It seems like,
Right, which
which is
once
which is the
again,
reason why we did this whole podcast.
yeah, and that's what music is. It's an experience for everyone, however they interpret it.
Yeah, and I'm very interested um when other people listen to this podcast, aka our mom and grandmother, how they'll like the album because I'm very curious now what people would think of this album particularly because it's so different than anything else I've heard before.
Yeah, I would love to know too, because once again, there's tons of people online who love Bruce Springsteen. Um, But I don't really know what their general consensus on this album is.
Yeah, I guess I should have maybe went on YouTube and see if they had their songs on YouTube or like live performances to see if what other people said in the comments. But I would assume they probably don't have that many videos on YouTube to begin with.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I think I've seen maybe a couple videos a long time ago, but they did not have a lot of views. So I
And
imagine they
this might
also
be
don't have a lot
this.
of comments either.
This probably is going to be the smallest band we cover on here. I have a feeling.
That is probably true. I didn't pick them because they
Yeah.
were so small. The reason I had picked them is because I had recently like kind of dived into the album and like actually got into it for a little period.
And truth be told, if this did exist on vinyl, which I don't think it did, but I will research it after,
We
I
will hunt
would
it
maybe buy it down the road just because it is so unique. I love having albums in my collection that are unique. And I feel like this one is unique.
for
So,
sure.
yeah. Well, I think that'll do it for this episode. Definitely let us know if you've heard this album or if you've listened to this album because of this episode, your thoughts and opinions. I'd be very curious to hear those. And then, yeah, we will be back next week with who knows what type of episode, but we will be back next week. And until then, we hope you take care. Bye bye.